We do know that happy relationships are the cornerstone of a happy life. Most relationships that I see, they can be repaired, but
Dr. Jess is an award-winning sexologist, best-selling author, public speaker, and Tinder's dating and relationship expert
who specializes in hosting retreats for business leaders and entrepreneurs across the globe.
You may take insecurity or jealousy as some sort of a label or an accusation, but these are temporary experiences. If you're feeling jealous, the first step is...
Why do people stay in relationships if they're unhappy?
Sometimes it has to do with stigma and social pressure. The idea of breaking up is seen as a failure, whereas the idea of staying together is a success. We have to stop measuring relationships in longevity and measure them in quality. Is it a great relationship because you've been together 20 years, or is it a great relationship because you love life together?
This aspiration for the perfect relationship, what does that look like?
So,
at one point, it like fluctuates. Sometimes the U.S. audience is higher, sometimes it's Canadian. Just also really depends on the guest.
I'm
right?
sure, yeah, of course.
So we're trying to do some experiments where we go to different U.S. cities. We did it last summer. We went to Miami.
Okay.
And it turned out really, really well. And so we're going to be doing something in L.A. a little later this year,
okay,
which we're really excited about. But Jess, welcome to episode number 3 together.
You haven't done anything since the last time I was here.
No, this is it. This is it.
3.
I take a break until you come back on the podcast. I'm like, when are you in Toronto? But since we last talked, you're now Tinder's dating and relationship expert.
That's
Congrats
right.
on that.
Thank you.
And we actually saw each other in New York at a Tinder event, which is really cool. And it was just so funny running into you. I walked into the restaurant and I'm like, I know you.
Yes. Familiar faces. And you were doing big things that week too in your personal life.
Yes. That was, I was doing a lot of running around in the city there. But I'm excited to have this conversation, as always, because every time we talk, I walk away learning so much from you, which is why I always want you to just come back on. But I wanted to chat about a few topics, particularly in dating. I know you and I had a chat briefly offline here where we were talking about how people show up when they go on dates. This idea and this concept of wanting to, be as authentic as they possibly can, because that's the new thing. Let's be authentic. Let's be ourselves. We're all imperfect. And it's nice to do that. But in practice, I say it all the time, but in practice, sometimes I know that I put on a facade. I show up a certain way. So my behavior doesn't always match my intentions. I'm wondering, at least from where you're sitting, what you're seeing in the dating space when it comes to how, and I don't know if this changes between Gen Z, millennials, etc., but what you're seeing.
Yeah, there is a generational gap in terms of what we say versus what we do. Mm-hmm. So here's what I'm seeing with Gen Z, totally unscientific, not empirical data, and then we can talk about what the data says.
Okay.
So I'm seeing Gen Z and very, very younger millennial daters basically aiming for perfectionism, right? Trying to make every relationship as perfect as possible. So I was talking to a student the other day, and she's just starting her master's. So she's probably 24 or so, 23. And she was saying, she's like, every student here is so horny and they're looking for a life partner, right? And they're very intentional about it. And if things don't seem to be jiving, they're trying to make it jive nonetheless. Like they want the relationship. They want the relationship to be great. It seems to be that they're embracing relationship goals, right? They want that trophy relationship. So there's stigma associated with being single, which is completely unfounded, of course. But there's this pressure and this move toward perfectionism. And years ago, maybe 2 years ago, I had interviewed a therapist in New York. And she was saying that she was seeing this. She actually saw this far before I did, where they'd come to her and they'd been dating 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and they wanted relationship therapy. So clearly things are not a fit, but they're saying, I've received the message that I can make anything work, that self-help, that relational help, that if I put the effort in, I can have what I want, which is this relationship. So they're taking this, square and they're trying to shove it into into a circular hole. And they're saying, I can make this work. If I put the effort in, I'm fully capable. So I don't know if it's a degree of overconfidence, maybe even a little bit of entitlement, maybe pressure, right? Pressure to be in a relationship, and not just pressure to be in a relationship, but to be thriving in a relationship. So that's sort of what I'm seeing now with Gen Z. But it's interesting because as Tinder's expert, I get access to their data, and what they're reporting is sort of the opposite, whereby Gen Z daters, should I say Gen Z or Gen Z?
I don't think it matters.
Okay, so
I say Gen Z.
Okay, Gen Z daters are actually looking for authenticity. So imperfection is welcomed, vulnerability is welcomed, talking about kind of deep feelings and topics is welcomed, rather than that performative side that I'm seeing. So there is this tension between maybe intent and behavior, or what we believe we want versus what we're actually enacting. And it's exactly what you described, right? I want to go on a date and be myself, be in the moment, enjoy myself, but instead I'm performing because there's a natural inclination to want to be liked, right? And so you're in the public eye. You work in a space where people are seeing you and they want to see all of you. But the reality is you're not going to show 1 million people, all of you, right? That is reserved probably for your closest circle.
Absolutely, yeah.
And when you go on a date, they're not yet inner circle.
Yeah.
So there's a balance. And I also think that there's a bit of rushing through vulnerability. So when we develop intimacy, yes, it can stem from vulnerability, but time is also required because you have to develop trust. Simply asking deep questions about people's greatest fears or vulnerabilities doesn't necessarily generate interpersonal closeness on the spot. And I think that there's been some overstating of research in that area. You probably heard of, do you remember the Aaron and Aaron studies, 36 questions to fall in love with anybody?
Yeah.
And so the intention, of course, was if you ask these meaningful questions, you will generate interpersonal closeness. And then these people ended up, two of the lab rat humans ended up getting married. And so people think if I ask deep questions, I will know you. But you can't rush time. You can't not make a week or a month longer than that. A week is a week, a month is a month, and that's how long you've known a person. So it does take time. And I don't think we can falsify that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think you can rush it. As you were talking, I was thinking about when I met Mila. We met during the pandemic, and while we couldn't necessarily rush time, it felt like our relationship jumped in time because we spent more quality time together. Whereas, if we were to meet today, it would be, hey, are you free Thursday after 6 p.m. for 2 hours to go for a coffee or a walk or whatever? And then you don't see each other for a few more days. Whereas in the pandemic, we were spending hours together. So really expedited, but that was quality time where you can ask those questions. You can really dive into it. But I want to go back because you talked about this aspiration for the perfect relationship. How much of that is social media just playing a huge role? I see all of these TikTok couples, these Instagram couples who live the perfect life. They're always happy with each other. They're making funny videos. So you're like, wow, your entire life must be just a comedy skit. This looks great. You're posting about each other. You're constantly pumping each other up. I want that. I mean, I even sometimes will look at that and go, that looks pretty cool. I kind of want that. And then I'm like, wait a minute. I know what I'm watching.
Right.
How much of that is playing a role in how perhaps maybe Gen Z is starting to look at this? Because they've basically grown up on social media.
I would actually suspect that Gen Z is less affected than other generations because it has always been there and they have an awareness of how this is a highlight reel. Right? I actually think it's oftentimes millennials and what comes before millennials, Gen X, who use social media in a more novel way because it's something that we didn't always have. Gen Z are the last to return texts, right? Like they respond when they feel like responding. We always kind of accuse the younger generations of being the ones who are glued to their phones. But look at your feed and think about it's the people a little bit older than us who are ranting on there, who are always on there, who reply to everything immediately. But I think we're all affected, obviously, regardless of age or generation. I think that if you're surrounded by all of these positive but unrealistically positive models, you think, well, why don't I have that? Absolutely. And of course, I'm not the first to say it. People are posting their highlight reel. And then I think it's getting even worse because these, happy TikTok couples who may very well be very happy, which is amazing. There's also performative imperfectionism, right? Or imperfection. So there's also this performative imperfection where they're like, no, we have problems too, right? And then they make a joke of that. So their problems aren't even serious. And, it's interesting. So I had a podcast and I've taken a little break from it because my dad's been sick. But Brandon and I, so my partner and I would co-host it together. And when we did an episode on what we fight about, and we did another episode on how we resolve conflict, people were really surprised that we fight. And I'm thinking, well, of course we fight. Once a month, I will fight with anyone. But it's interesting because even us, I will admit that we're only showing a little bit of it, right? I'm not going to go and speak to the public or speak to people with whom I have parasocial relationships if I'm in the middle of a fight. Like, of course, it's easy for Brandon and I to talk about an argument after the argument has been resolved, right? And so I try and provide this model, but even like me, it's only a piece of it, right? I'm not going to come in the middle of it and tell you what a jerk I am, show everybody how irrational I am, show everybody that I misspeak and that I'm saying things that hurt at times, right? And so
we all get spiteful. We all want to poke in that moment.
Yeah. So I think the performative imperfection is just another layer of, okay, so we look perfect, and then we show you this kind of performative vulnerability, right? Like looking at the camera while I'm crying to tell you I have bad days too. Okay, that could be helpful for people, and I do like that we have models of folks crying, especially seeing men cry and men struggle or men well up, people of all genders, of course, but I know that there's less space for men to show that side of vulnerability. There's value in that. But again, just remember that we've decided to pick up the camera. So you're seeing a piece of it, but you're not seeing the full picture. Absolutely. And you're right. I guess if we look at that every day and we see these people having so much fun vacuuming or so much fun doing the dishes, whether it's sponsored by a hand wash company or not, we're saying, well, you know what? I'm just having a bad day and I'm sick of this person right now. Why don't I feel what they feel? But I think that media literacy is so important. Media literacy has always been of paramount importance. I was an English teacher. And so I would try and integrate that across all subject matters, or all subjects. And now media literacy has shifted because the content that we receive is so much more voluminous, right? It used to be you could read something that felt outraging and you would sit with it. You would say, look at this injustice in the world. And it could affect you in a different way. But now I see one injustice, and a nanosecond later, there's another, and another, and another. And so, yes, there's a psychological toll, but there's also, I think, we become a bit desensitized.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, I shifted way over there, as I do. There's a squirrel.
But, the desensitization piece, I think, is a big one. And I was thinking as you were talking about how perhaps it's millennials and Gen X who are spending even more time on social media while complaining that Gen Z are the ones that are. As you were talking, I was like, yeah, that is happening. And I know people who are doing that. And I know people who are going on and ranting about various things and quick to reply and constantly on. And if you send them a message or a DM, they're immediately replying type of thing. Is there... then for that particular generation, millennials and Gen X, when it comes to dating for them, what's the biggest, I guess, hurdle that they're trying to overcome at this point?
Yeah, so that kind of age range of older I think they call us geriatric millennials. A lot of folks are getting back into the dating scene after a breakup from a serious relationship. Oftentimes they have children, and there's a whole other layer because they've been out of the dating game for so long. And I think you and I talked about this a while ago. I work in dating and I work with people who are dating and hear hundreds of stories every week. But I'm not dating. And so to go back into the dating pool when the landscape has shifted so significantly, so not just the digital landscape, but also the world. So we are post-pandemic, the way we socialize is different. The way we set boundaries is different. So the biggest challenge, I think, is coming back and saying, how do I navigate online dating? How do I navigate the language of dating? How do I navigate the fact that I have more choice, more options, more access than ever before? And I'm faced with this paradox of choice, right? So I'm a 40-year-old woman, for example, and I've come out of a long-term relationship. And do I want to date folks in their 20s? Do I want to date folks who are older than me? I'm seeing folks who never identified as queer who are dating people who are not I don't want to say the opposite gender, but who are dating all genders. And this is something later in life. So we're seeing really interesting approaches to dating. Another piece that I'll speak to that I think is the positive side of technology is we now have so many groups online, support groups, whether they're on Facebook or if you're on some sort of other platform. Folks are asking questions and sharing experiences. So yes, it's voluminous, but I think there's a lot of value in being able to go online and say, I'm X years old, this is my story, who else has a similar experience? And what I notice about multiple generations, but I would say like younger folks, is they're pretty great about sharing experiences without sharing advice. Because, you know, there's a tendency to generalize or globalize individual experiences. So this happened to me, therefore this is what happens. Whereas I'm noticing a really strong shift to saying, okay, I was in a similar situation and this is what I felt. This is what I experienced. This is what I took away from it. And so I think there's a lot of valuable learning there. I would consider it a form of group therapy. I realize folks are not therapists, but I think there's a real value in experience sharing.
Well, I mean, to that point, I had a guest on who is a therapist by trade who talked about group therapy or sort of men's groups being a platform that supports men in a way where they get almost permission to have conversations because they see others doing it versus individualized therapy. So it's not out of this world. I mean, as you're talking about it, I go, yeah, I can understand then why when you see these groups and you see the conversations that are happening, you go, oh, okay, yeah. Like other people feel the same thing. They're going through something similar. I feel a little bit more comfortable having these conversations, reaching out and saying, hey, you know, I'm going on a date for the first time in X number of years. That's not my ex so-and-so. You know, advice, anyone?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And there's so much validation in that.
Oh.
And I think there's validation in the diversity of experiences too, because somebody might say, you know what, I just want to go out and have casual sex. Here's how I did it. Here's the app I used. Or I was looking for something really serious, or I wanted to date, in a specific area. And so you can choose what kind of works for you. And a therapist actually can't offer that same support. And again, I want to be clear because folks are going to say, that's not therapy. I'm obviously not saying it's therapy. I'm coming from that background. But I think there's value in experience sharing. And what you said about men's groups in particular, I think there's huge value in that. So I facilitate workshops, obviously, and they're for people of all genders, but sometimes I will get men's groups and sometimes we'll do some splitting up. And I've had experiences where my partner, Brandon, has been with me and I've asked him, can you just get this group started? And they will open up because he will open up, right? I think about this one session on jealousy. And for me to talk about data on jealousy and research on jealousy and case studies on jealousy is one thing. But for Brandon to say, yeah, when this happened, I felt really jealous. This is what I felt. This is how I responded. This is how I processed jealousy when I was 21 versus when I'm 41. All of a sudden, these guys are talking in a different way, right? It's just one person who needs to kind of create space for, yes, validation, but permission. In sex therapy, we talk about a implicit model where most folks need permission. Everybody needs permission. And then people need information. They call it limited information. Then some folks need specific suggestions. And it's a smaller group of folks who are going to have the intensive therapy. But we all need that, I guess you would call it a base of permission.
Absolutely.
And that modeling is more valuable than any data ever will be.
Well, Brandon leading with vulnerability is what gives permission to the other guys in that room to also share their vulnerability. Because there's that inherent fear of, I can't talk about how I was jealous, and because I know when I was in my 20s and I got jealous of something another guy did, or the way, a guy said hello to my girlfriend, and I got immediately jealous and mad at her like it was her fault someone said hello to her. Like that's embarrassing sometimes to say that out loud in front of a group of people that you don't really know. And be like, yeah, I messed up as when I was a kid, and this is now how I process it.
Right. And it's a universal experience. Emotions are universal. And we treat, I guess, some emotions as positive and we want to get more of them, and some as negative and we want to rid ourselves of them, when of course you can't rid yourself of feelings. Because I will run into people who will say, I've never felt jealous, or I never feel insecure. And I'm thinking, you may take insecurity or jealousy as some sort of a label or an accusation, but these are temporary experiences, right? At all times, or at some point in time, everybody is going to experience jealousy. At some point in time, everybody's going to feel insecure. At some point in time, we may feel hopeless, right? This range of experiences is what makes us human, and trying to eradicate them is an exercise in futility, obviously.
So if someone's listening to this, watching this, and they hear you talk about, trying to eradicate this idea of jealousy or being insecure, because it does happen to everybody.
Yes.
And there's a negative connotation to, he gets jealous, or, Samir gets insecure about X, or whatever it is. That suddenly you're on the defensive of like, yeah, but, or no, that's not true. Then what is a good exercise or way to approach something when you're feeling a sense of jealousy? Or if you're on the flip side, your partner is feeling a sense of jealousy, how you can support them.
So I think if you're feeling jealous, the first step is being willing to admit it, right? And anytime we take an emotion that folks tend to avoid, we usually say make friends with it, right? So anybody who's done cognitive behavioral therapy or who has dealt with anxiety, oftentimes the therapist is going to say first step is making friends with it and saying this actually serves a function, right? Jealousy can be a normative experience or it can be a problematic experience. So if I feel jealous, it may help me recognize something that I'm concerned about or something that I want to preserve, because there's different ways to frame jealousy. So the first step is saying like, I feel jealous, right? Because if you avoid jealousy, if you feel jealousy and then instead you turn to anger, or instead you turn to accusing somebody of something, or you turn to possession, well, then we can't really deal with the jealousy. But if you have the capacity to say, I'm human and I feel jealous, that's a good start. And so just knowing that everybody experiences it, that it doesn't make you a bad person, that it doesn't mean that your relationship is unstable, that it doesn't mean that it has to explode into something particularly negative is the first step. Sometimes we'll recommend that folks kind of just check in with your body. What do you feel when you feel jealous? Because sometimes the reaction that comes from jealousy, so it's the behavior, not the actual emotion, that can be problematic. You might lash out, you might scream, you might turn away, you might withdraw. If you can feel what you're feeling in your body, the physiological response to the feeling, sometimes addressing the physiological sensation first can be more effective than trying to actually deal with the emotion, especially if you're feeling a little irrational, if your heart is beating over 100 beats a minute, we lose that capacity to be rational. So if you can say, you know what, I can feel that I'm breathing really shallow. So, okay, I'm just gonna deepen my breath for a second. Or I can feel that I'm starting to sweat. So I'm just gonna slow down for a moment. Or I can feel that I'm tightening my butthole, right? A lot of the stuff happens in our head and the tail. Like, can I just relax for a moment? Because sometimes with negative emotions or emotions that we don't tend to want to experience, if we address the physiological sensations, it actually lessens or attenuates that effect of the emotion in the body. And then the question is, well, what am I going to do about it, right? So what is the problem with feeling jealous? So they have something that I want, right? Getting to the root of it. Okay, they have something that I want, or they're threatening something that I feel I have in the case of relationships. Be a little bit rational about it. Like, well, what do I think is going to happen? So this person is, I don't know, richer or seems more charming, or sometimes it has to do with the way we perceive people's appearance. Like, do they have something that is going to threaten something that I've built over time? And what are the messages, what are the sociocultural messages tied to identity that have made me believe that? Because oftentimes it's not rational, right? Sometimes it's like that old reptilian brain saying there's some danger when there actually isn't. And you can't really think rationally if your physical sensations are going off the charts. So it's kind of asking yourself, what am I worried about here?
I wonder how much of that is a subconscious or inherent fear that whatever that other person, that third party is doing to your partner could potentially result in your partner leaving you. I know when I was younger, that was always the fear of, oh, this person is better looking, more jacked, taller, stereotypical guy things. And then thinking to myself, at what point is she just going to be like, that's the better option? And I think in this world of having a buffet of options, that's a constant fear. And I've had people tell me that that's something that they worry about.
I think everybody worries about that at some moment in time. So we can kind of look at what the present moment is and also recognize in a bigger picture sense that we don't own anybody, right? And so if we can look at connection as quality, as fulfillment, as building a life together, as friendship, as companionship, we're probably going to be less worried about someone else's abs or someone else's height or someone else's even pocketbook. That was such an old word to use, pocketbook.
I saw you stutter in a moment as your pocketbook.
How did I say pocketbook? I've been hanging out with my dad. I was at his retirement home earlier. It's just, the language starts to shift. So I think that we have to be able to recognize what we're feeling. So your capacity today to say, you know what, I was really just worried I was going to lose her. We can't usually get there. And you can't get there if you don't admit you're jealous. So each step kind of builds upon the other. And I'm not trying to make it sound complicated because it doesn't actually have to be. Number one, I feel jealous. Number two, how does it feel in my body? Number three, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of here? And is that realistic? Because when you're really stressed about something, let's put jealousy aside for a moment. When you have so much on your plate and you're worried about a whole bunch of things, if you write it down, oftentimes you realize, actually, it's not that big of a deal, right? Like, I can actually manage this. So is my partner going to leave me because, I don't know, somebody has an extra ab that I don't have? I guess abs come in two, right? Or whatever it is people are worried about. I don't know. Can you get one ab?
I don't know.
Maybe you can do
like
the side
one
sit-ups
side,
on one side only. That would be something I would do. I'd get bored. So I only do one side of my hair. I'm like, I don't want to do the other one. So I think that we can be a little bit more rational about it. What are we really afraid of here, right? And then you asked about supporting a partner. So number one, though, I think we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do about it? Because we do often turn to external sources to assuage our negative feelings without even looking internally and saying, oh, actually, I can manage some of this, right? Like, how can I change the way I talk to myself? How can I change the way I think? How can I change what I'm doing in this moment to assuage the jealousy, to lessen it, or to sit with it? And then you might also ask your partner for what it is you need, right? And so people will kind of immediately turn a corner and say, I need you not to talk to him, right? But what we probably need is some sort of validation, some sort of communication of security. And we need that on an ongoing basis, right? So if you lay the foundation in the relationship whereby I'm receiving positive messages, I am receiving messages of security, of love, of value, of connection over time, and I'm nurturing that right back so that it's reciprocal, it's probably a little bit easier than only asking for that or only receiving that in a moment of tension, in a moment of crisis, right? So if I don't know that we're in a committed relationship, if I'm unsure, because so many folks, that's another thing we're seeing, are in these situationships where they don't really know what they are, where they don't want to define it, which is fine. But if that's making you feel insecure to the point that you're feeling distressed often, where you're worried about losing something that you actually value, whether you're admitting it or not, then it's harder to get that reassurance, right? But if you have that foundation where you generally feel loved, you generally feel safe, you generally feel valued, you feel connected, you're probably, going to be able to do the more rational self-talk on your own, and you're probably going to be better equipped to ask for what you need, right? Sometimes it's as simple as, tell me you love me, tell me I have nothing to worry about, and that's okay too. One concern, and I don't know if we've ever talked about this, is when folks accuse their partner of their feelings. Like, oh, you're just jealous. You're insecure. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm feeling. Thanks so much for telling me that I'm feeling what I'm feeling. People do it with anger, right? In certain cultures, like some cultures we're very comfortable with anger and angry expressions, but other cultures, like, you're angry. Yeah, I'm angry. Yeah. That's what I'm feeling. Again, a human emotion. And we don't want to accuse people of their feelings. We want to think about, I'm not responsible for your feelings, but obviously if I care about you and I care about everyone, I believe there's love between all of us, I don't want you to feel badly.
Sure.
So I'm not responsible for your feelings, but am I creating conditions? Is my behavior intensifying some feelings that maybe I could do a little shift so you don't feel those feelings as much? Again, I think we have to find this balance, and there always has to be nuance around, if you feel jealous, of course I want to offer reassurance. And if we have the foundation of love and trust and security, and I communicate my care for you, and you're struggling with your jealousy, that's probably work you want to do on your own. And this is probably the most important piece in relationships, and why so many therapists don't want to do couples therapy. Because oftentimes we see problems as rooted in the relationship, when in fact, yes, sometimes it's a dynamic you've created together, but sometimes there are just some issues that we need to work out on our own, right? So in couples therapy, you've got individual one, individual two, and then the kind of entity, which is the third, the relationship itself you've created in the dynamic. So if you're struggling with that, that might be something I don't need to go to therapy with you. And again, therapy is not the only route, but it can be super helpful.
Sure.
If you're struggling with a feeling, maybe go talk to someone about it, right? And it could be a few sessions. It doesn't have to be over the course of 2 years.
I think you put it in a very interesting way, this concept of the relationship as the third entity, because you are two individuals who've decided to merge into like one entity of some kind. But for the most part, you still have your individual needs, wants, ways of approaching things. And if you're not grounded in yourself on an individual level, you're bringing all that instability into the relationship. And the way you talked about the partner, accusing you're just jealous, or you're just angry in a very negative way, it makes me wonder what level of responsibility falls on the partner because like in that scenario, I've been in relationships where I've had that, and I've been in relationships with you're feeling something right now, and you should probably try to work through it so that we can actually have a meaningful conversation. Those relationships always perform better, in my experience. The ones that were like, oh, you're just being jealous, actually made me angry.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on how you enacted, how you responded to jealousy, right? So if I'm just feeling a way and you're accusing me of it, so again, more context, more nuance, that could be problematic. Whereas if you are jealous and you're lashing out at someone, if you're jealous and withdrawing, then I think they, of course, should address your behavior, but they're seeing it rooted in this feeling, right? They're maybe helping you along the way, but as you said, causing more harm, getting you. Nobody wants to be told they're angry when they're angry. No one wants to be told to relax when they're activated, right? And so, again, I think the other thing is we don't have to take on our partner's feelings, right? Like if I'm not feeling great about something, it's not necessarily Brandon's job to take care of it. But oftentimes we create dynamics where we feel that responsibility. And I can admit that we have that dynamic where if I'm upset, Brandon really wants to fix it. Even if it's not related to him, he's very focused on taking care of me. And of course, it's the most lovely, supportive thing ever. And we have to set limits on it because I'm going to have days where I'm struggling. And he has to be able to emotionally differentiate so that he isn't pulled down by my struggle or, on the other side, right? If he's, negative about something and I can get very frustrated with negativity, I have to let that go and say, you know what, that's the way he's going to be. And there is going to be some differentiation here. Like you'll hear language of codependency tossed around, but I'm careful with that because we are social creatures and we are absolutely affected by the people around us, especially an intimate partner or anybody you live with, whoever your family unit is. And so, of course, if somebody's angry, we know that emotions can be contagious. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're affected by it, but we also have to do our own job of emotional differentiation and saying, okay, I'm not going to let this overtake whatever I'm focused on today.
As you were talking, I was thinking about my relationship with Mila, and between the two of us, I have very strong emotions about things. Mm-hmm. It's just I'm wired that way. Mm-hmm. If I feel a certain way about something, I don't do a very good job hiding it. Mm-hmm. If I'm unhappy with something or something upsets me, or and I've been trying to get better at not necessarily regulating it, because for a long time I had subscribed to the idea of you just don't feel your emotions, you bury them. And then it got to a point where I'm just feeling all my emotions, and I need to make sure that I do that in moderation and in a way that's healthier. So I'm constantly trying to toe that balance between, feeling the emotion, but not letting the emotion get so strong that it now takes over the mood, the conversation, whatever we're doing at that time. It's a constant, seesaw effect, if you will.
Yeah, and I think that there is such a focus on feeling your feelings, processing your feelings, working on your feelings, and we can't do that 24/7.
And we can't expect the other person to be the receiver of all of that. And I think in our last episode together, you talked about how we depend on our partners to be our friend, our confidant, our romantic partner, our co-parent, etc. And it's funny, those exact words are burned in my mind, where every time I think, okay, I am now moving towards putting a lot on Mila that I need to now, I have friends, I have other outlets, I need to use those outlets. Let's do that.
That's a huge deal, especially in male-female hetero relationships, mm-hmm. because we do know that women tend to, and of course there are exceptions, but overall women tend to have more sources of emotional support. And there tends to be an overload or an imbalance where men in relationships with women will put a lot of that emotion, right? They may on their partner. They may not have those outlets. And we're seeing a huge shift. So anytime people talk about data, like even me saying that women tend to have more social supports, we're seeing shifts, right? And the data is always lagging a little bit. I work only with folks who run businesses, right, and own businesses. And it skews heavily toward men. It's probably about 80-20 in terms of the clients. And these men are part of an organization that offers these formal support groups related to self, business, and family. And so I see them in many ways as exceptional because they have these groups with whom they meet in a very structured and serious and meaningful fashion once a month. And so a lot of the data that I work with that is gendered, I have to adjust for them because they have far more meaningful emotional support because of these groups they're working with. And I think it makes them better people. It obviously makes them better business leaders from the outcomes we're seeing, and it definitely makes them better partners. So when people think about being a better partner, they often think of offering practical support or buying gifts or, giving words of affirmation, and all of those actions are really valuable. But also it's about working on yourself and your entire, I guess, holistic approach to life, as opposed to just leaning on your partner for everything. And I get it. You like that person. You love that person. You feel safe with that person. And they may be the biggest part of your life. In many people's cases, that is true. But we have to kind of set some limits when it feels like it's becoming too much. And I think it's amazing that you're self-aware enough to know that. And I hope that that's a model for people to say, okay, am I putting too much on this one person? We see that in business. Right? I see that because I work with business partners as well who are not in romantic relationships together. And I really see an imbalance when one of the business partners has more support more generally in life than the other, because the other is coming to the business and looking for emotional validation, psychological support, social support in the business or with the partner, whereas the other one has all these other rich sources of support.
What's the key to a long-lasting relationship? Why do people stay in relationships if they're unhappy?
Well, those are two very different questions. I'd love to talk about the second one, but it ties to the first one because I do think we have to stop measuring relationships in longevity and measure them in quality. When people hear that I've been with Brandon for so long, they're like, oh my God, congrats. And I mean, I do feel like it's amazing and enriching, and I feel super lucky to be going through my life with this guy. He's just lovely.
Brandon is fantastic. I only met him the one time, and I fell in love with the guy. He's so nice. Everybody
likes Brandon better than me, and I'm here for it. Like, he is better than me. And he makes me want to be as good as him. He really is incredible. But by virtue of knowing how many years we've spent together, to me, it doesn't really speak to the quality of the relationship. So I think that we need to start looking at relational quality over relationship longevity. So my question would be, what's the key to a fulfilling relationship? And it definitely varies from person to person and couple to couple. But I think what a lot of people are lacking when you ask about the folks who stay together, even though they're miserable, is intent. I think that one of the keys, and I can't break it down to, one key, but one key is being intentional about your relationship. Having some sort of a plan, and I don't mean a strict business plan that you must stick to, but really knowing your why. Why are we together? Why do I want to be with this person? When people are struggling in a relationship, my first question is not why are you struggling? My question is, why do you want to repair this? Like, why is this valuable to you? And so tied into intent is understanding why this person is so important to you. Is it because you met 20 years ago and you've just been together? Is it because you've put in all this effort so you might as well stick it out? Or is it because I really like this person? And so I always value like over love. Because love is and of course there's, it's fairly abstract to
I would agree with
define these terms, but you want to like this person.
Yeah.
You want to admire this person and be drawn to spending time with them because in their presence, you feel at ease or you feel joy or you feel, I think about what I like in my relationship, and it's that there's always laughter and there's always joy and there's always just this richness where I want to be near him. Not all the time. Like I need my space too, but I'm drawn to that.
Yeah.
Yes, I love him. Of course, I love him so deeply. I want him to just have the best life ever, whatever that means to him, right? It feels like I don't have children, which, you know, is more rare, but becoming more common for women my age. But I love him deeply, and it feels like a love the way I imagine a parent loves a child. Like the way not all parents, obviously, but my mom, the way my mom loves me, she just wants me to have the best life. And that's how I feel about Brendan, and he definitely feels that way toward me. And he's really, I think, expressed that over the many years we've been together. And I took longer to come to the table and really understand that. So yes, I love him. But the key to me is that I really like him. I like spending time with him. I like working on projects with, like, we work in business together with him. I like traveling with him. I like sitting next to him. I like when we're apart. I like that he's having a good time, or I'm usually having the better time. But I think liking your partner is super important. And when people end up in these relationships where they are miserable together, I think they've stopped liking each other. They may still love each other in that they care about one another, but they don't really like each other. And there's so many reasons why people stay together when they're miserable. Sometimes it has to do with stigma and social pressure. The idea of breaking up is seen as a failure, whereas the idea of staying together is a success, which is exactly why I think we need to eradicate the notion that longevity is the measure of the relationship. Is it a great relationship because you've been together 20 years, or is it a great relationship because you love life together, right? You live your best lives together. So what's the point in staying together for 5, 10, 15, 20 years if you don't like each other? But I see them as no longer liking one another, right? Like they're just unhappy, but they love each other and they feel connected in some way, or they're fearful, right? People stay because they're fearful. They're fearful of what's out there. They're fearful of being alone, which is interesting because one of the outcomes of a very unhappy relationship is loneliness and social isolation. And oftentimes your other periphery, or I shouldn't say periphery, but non-romantic relationships also suffer. You pull back from your friends, you pull back from your family because you are so physically, emotionally, and practically drained from an unhappy relationship. I know you asked about why they're still together, but the outcomes of staying together in a miserable relationship are physical, right? Everything from cardiovascular disease to poor sleep to blood pressure, all of these negative health outcomes are tied to unhappy marriage. I mostly have marital research, but marriage doesn't matter. You're living together. It's a relationship. So we've got physical, we've got psychological toll. Of course, we see higher rates of depression, anxiety, distress. Folks living with chronic stress, as we know, the physical toll that it takes on your body. Yep. We cannot discount that. There are financial costs, not to breaking up, yes, to breaking up, but also to staying together. When you're unhappy, we know that people who experience lower marital satisfaction, higher marital strife, also run into financial issues because they have difficulty communicating with one another. So usually the research goes in the other way, and they say that money problems lead to relationship problems, but there's also evidence showing that relationship problems also lead to financial problems. The workplace outcomes and career outcomes for folks who are in unhappy, unhealthy relationships are very serious, not just around productivity and satisfaction, but practical elements like absenteeism, like losing your job, like quitting your job. And so it kind of affects every area of our lives if we're in unhappy relationships. And so I think that in a culture that stigmatizes being single, we think that you're going to have these negative outcomes if you're single, but it's, going to probably be healthier to not be in a relationship than to be in a relationship that is causing you physical, psychological, financial, personal harm.
So someone's listening, watching this, they're in a relationship, married, not married, doesn't matter, but they're in a relationship and they're trying to establish what their next step will be. They're afraid of the stigmas, they're afraid of the implications. They've invested so much time into something, and it would feel like a failure to finally say it's over. What options exist for people like that? If they're not ready to sort of say, you know what, this is over, but they can't stay in the same state of living.
Yeah, so I'm not here to tell people to leave or break up because you're in an unhappy relationship. But I think there are a couple of things to know. One is that it's not going to get better on its own. You're pretty much guaranteed it's probably going to get worse. And then I usually start with a few questions, which is that why, right? Like, why do you care about this person? Why do you value the relationship? And why do you want to repair it? And that helps me to understand, okay, so what are we working with here, right? And then also how, because this goes back to feelings. I always want people to start with feelings. How are you feeling in this relationship? And how do you want to feel, right? So how are you feeling versus how do you want to feel? And can we make sure we differentiate between how you're feeling in life and how you're feeling in the relationship? Because oftentimes we'll experience negative emotions or negative experiences, right? We say, I'm unhappy, I feel unfulfilled, I feel dissatisfied, I feel distressed. And then we associate it with what is proximal. So we blame the relationship, right? When really it has to do with something else in our lives. So are you bringing other stuff into the relationship, attributing this negative feeling, experience, or outcome to the relationship when in fact it may be another source? So we go to the why, and then finally the what, right? So we already talked about, how do you want to feel, but also what do you want? What is it you specifically want? And you can't just say, I want a happy relationship. I mean, yeah, you can, but we're going to have to go a bit deeper than that.
Yeah, it's a little broad.
Yeah, what is it you're looking for? And then my next question is always, what are you going to do about it? Right? Because you can come to me with a list of what you want from your partner, but your partner, again, is only half of this relationship dynamic. Are there exceptions? Of course. And I shouldn't say that. It's not 50-50. I'm not saying that every relationship is 50-50 in terms of problems or in terms of positive outcomes. But we do want to start with, what am I going to do about it? So I know how I want to feel. I know what I want. So what am I going to do about it? And what am I requesting of my partner? And I know that sounds kind of dumbed down or oversimplified, but that's where I would start in terms of solution-focused approaches to the relationship. I think another really important question to ask is, are you going to be okay with the relationship being in the state that it is in 1 year, in 10 years, in 15 years? Because when I think about the cases that I'm seeing where people are together but really, really miserable, if they're able to look forward to the future, they know that they're probably going to break up or they need to fix this. And most relationships that I see, they can be repaired if both people are on board, right? Humans, we can do really good things.
Yeah, when we want to.
Yeah, we can be better. And it can just feel so overwhelming. It's like when you have a pile of work to do, you can't even start.
Yeah.
And I think that's how folks feel in relationships, because they're unhappy, but there are so many reasons why they're unhappy. They're unhappy because of division of labor. They're unhappy because of specific incidents that occurred, maybe infidelity. They're unhappy because they aren't getting the love and validation that they need. But oftentimes we say our partners aren't giving us something, but we're not asking them for it. We don't even know what it is we want. So I want to feel loved. Okay, but what does that look like to me? For me, I like to hear it. I like physical closeness. I like when Brandon carves out quality time, right? And shows me that I'm a priority. And so I can name those things. But sometimes people will say, I don't feel cared for, but I'm unclear what it is they want. And so I can't help them to ask for it if they can't verbalize it. And I think it's hard. We don't have a lot of models in terms of what happy and healthy relationships look like, right? Most of us have only seen intimate relationships in two contexts, once with our parents and once with ourselves. And we created this insular domestic sphere where nobody's supposed to interfere, right? In Western culture, right? Like don't interfere in other people's relationships. Actually, all relationships are interconnected, right? I'm not saying step in and tell somebody what they need, but in an ideal world, we have enough community that all of our relationships sort of overlap and we support each other. And, I come from a culture where the generation would live with us, right? My dad lived with us for a very, very long time. And so people are intertwined in your relationship, the good, the bad, the ugly, for better or worse. But there is some value in that, right? To have people have three generations living in a household. Yeah. And that can be really valuable in terms of different sources of support and modeling relationships as well, because maybe you had parents who didn't communicate very well, but you saw your grandparents communicate differently. I had a client the other day, and she was actually a Canadian, but we were overseas. She's moved overseas, and she was saying that her grandparents were the model of relationships for her. And she said, my grandma told me that my grandpa made love to him every day into their 80s. And that doesn't mean sex in one specific way, but pleasure and physical connection and intimacy. And she doesn't really want to settle for less. And it's helped her to build her relationships in a way that they're fulfilling over time. And she's not going to waste her time on relationships that aren't.
I can completely agree with that notion of seeing a positive model for a relationship is so important.
Mm-hmm.
I know growing up, watching my parents interact with one another, I saw them argue and then I would see them make up. But I think the biggest thing that stuck with me was how they'd make each other laugh. Like little things that they would say to each other. Or if we were having dinner and it's almost like they're having their own conversation and saying something to each other. And I was like, there's something there that I don't know about. And it's not that I want to know about it, but there's just something nice about seeing them that way that now I like that I have that with Mila, right? Like we could be at a table with friends and we can say, there's an inside joke of some kind and we both start laughing, or we just look at each other and we know what we're thinking type of thing. That little level, that's a whole other level of intimacy, I find.
And it sounds like they liked each other.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't just love. It wasn't just partnership. There's a like.
Yeah, absolutely. And the like piece, I couldn't agree more. You really have to like the person. I can remember times where I was in a relationship where I was in love with the idea of the person. But when I look back on them, or look back on the relationship rather, if I was sitting in front of that person today and they were still as they were, I would not like them. I would not want to have coffee, lunch. I would not want to engage in a conversation. They just weren't nice people. And as you were talking about, looking at your surroundings, if you're in an unhappy relationship, it made me wonder if that's why there's been such a rise in these sort of social creators, like the perfect relationship online, right? Because it's resonating with people. They're looking at that and going, I wish I could have that.
Yeah, it's aspirational, as unrealistic as the models we're seeing may be, because we're seeing them on average 8 seconds online. It is aspirational because we do want happy relationships. And it doesn't have to be with a partner, right? It can be with friends. It could be with family. I think about cultures where our cousins are so important to us. We do know that happy relationships are the cornerstone of a happy life, right? We've talked about, I'm sure, the Harvard study where the number one predictor of relational or of life satisfaction and well-being at age 80 is the quality of our relationships, our social ties at age 50. So most of us have some time to work on that. But yeah, relationships are a big part of our lives. They are determining factors in our health, mental and physical, in our wealth, in our well-being, in our life satisfaction. We need happy relationships. I don't think that there's any asset that requires or is deserving of more investment than relationships. And I don't just mean romantic ones. I think about everything, that we go through in life. And when you have social support and love and care and community, it's different than going through it alone. And that's kind of one of those phenomena we're seeing in unhappy marriages or relationships where they're not alone, but they are lonely. They're experiencing the symptoms and the negative repercussions of loneliness. And I think we're afraid to go tell people that we're unhappy in our relationships, or we do it in a joking way, or we wait until it gets really, really bad and we're willing to admit we don't even like our partner anymore, but we kind of accept it. And we talk about emotions being contagious, and there's been some studies suggesting that divorce is contagious, just in that folks tend to arrive at divorce at the same time in their social circles and their age groups. But certainly...
Sorry, can I throw a comment on that?
Yeah.
I really do think that that's more of a, speaking of permission, it's showing other people who may be in a similar situation that this is okay to go through the process. It's normal. Seeing someone else go through a divorce, going, I've been thinking about this for some time, but I've never really had the courage to pull the trigger because I don't know what's involved. I don't know. And suddenly you see someone within your social circle go through it and you go, it's bad. I mean, it's generally, for the most part, a bad experience. But seeing someone go through it and then seeing how they can come out the other side, you go, I do want that. And that's if you've, obviously you've decided that's it for the relationship. And I think that's probably one of the biggest factors. I know in my last relationships, the idea of, what does that look like? What, you mean I have to go back 10 years and figure out all my finances, and I don't know
Mm-hmm.
where this is. I don't know what that is. And it's a very daunting thing, and I can understand why people would be hesitant to break up, because it's almost easier to stay in the relationship than to go through that really rough 2-3 years of divorce.
Mm-hmm. So it was a negative. It wasn't a positive breakup, because some
No.
breakups are positive.
Absolutely.
That's the
Yeah.
other thing I'm seeing is people who have decided, because we're seeing a rise in silver divorce, so divorce post 50, post 55, people who have decided, like, I really like this person, I really care about this person, and this isn't really how I want to live my life,
Yeah.
right? And so we're not making the best life partners, and maybe we will stay friends, and many of them do. I mean, there are rich friendships between exes.
Yeah.
I can speak personally. My dad requires some care, and he's divorced from my mom, and I have a stepdad. And my mom and my stepdad are supporting a lot. I won't say too much more. I don't want to,
Sure.
be unfair to my dad, but they do so much. And the staff who are helping out are always not understanding that my mom is the ex, right? They're like, but she's always here. She's always doing all these things, but she just cares. She's a caring person, and their relationship is different than it was 40, 50 years ago, however long ago. And there's still love there. There's still care. And I think that's for me, that's a really positive model. So my parents divorced when I was a teenager. I think I was in high school. And I see it as a very positive outcome for everybody.
It's funny because as you talked about breakups, I think a lot of us, particularly guys in general, I know myself included, had struggled with how to break up. We just don't know how to do it well. And so we do it in a very bad way, which tends to really, what's the word I'm trying to hear? Color how the other person sees relationships going forward. I mean, I've had scenarios where I didn't know how to break up, so I just became an asshole until she broke up with me. And when I look back, I'm like, I was an idiot. Like, why would I do that to another human being? Like, I was so unkind. It's not that I intentionally did stuff. It's just I stopped doing the things that I knew she liked, because I'm like, I don't want to give her that message. But I didn't have the courage to simply say, let's break up. And I didn't even know how to say, I want to break up. I was like fearful of, causing harm. But in essence, I ultimately caused more harm by doing it that way.
Yeah, I think you summed it up. None of us wants to hurt anybody else for the most part. And we have to recognize by being unclear, by creating space for a connection, by giving false hope, we're actually being more unkind than if we were straightforward. But yeah, of course, it's really hard to tell somebody, I no longer want this, right? Because inevitably, most people are going to hear that as rejection of self. I no longer want you, right? Whereas if we can reframe and understand that not every relationship is going to be the perfect fit in every possible way. So for example, I may be able to be friends with someone, but I wouldn't want to be romantic partners. Or I can be romantic partners with someone, but they may not want to be in business with me because of the way I operate in business. Maybe that's Brendan. He'd be smart not to work with me. But you can't be everything to everybody. And yeah, it is really hard. When they talk about breaking up with compassion, one of the really important pieces is to be clear. So, and I know that I'm definitely guilty of this, not in breakups, but in work. Sometimes I'll create space for something just because I don't want to give a hard no. And so I'm dishonestly saying maybe in the future when really what I want to be saying is no. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we make in breakups. We create space for a potential reunification when it doesn't exist. And that, of course, causes more harm.
Absolutely.
Right.
Hope is you give someone hope. And I've had that. I've been on the receiving end of being broken up with and then told, maybe we can revisit this in, a couple of weeks. And there I am, like checking the calendar, like, all right, it's been a couple of weeks. Let's have this conversation. And then it's just kicking the can further and further down the road until eventually there's a no. And I look back on it and go, I was just dragged along the whole time. And it speaks to being clear and being able to just articulate and communicate that.
Yeah, and that's not an easy thing to do.
No,
nobody
by any
really
stretch.
wants to give bad news.
Of course.
And nobody wants to be cause harm. And I think we have to maybe talk more about these things. I mean, you're creating these conversations where we can talk about rejection, right? I know last time we talked about rejection being able to manage rejection being a life skill, and we can all get better at that.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that we also need to talk about breakups more because there is this I think, drive to celebrate breakups and to be strong and to get back out there, when sometimes you want to sit at home and you want to be upset and you want to be hurt, and we need to give ourselves space to be those things.
Absolutely.
To feel those things, again, without analyzing every feeling. I do think we're moving toward over-analyzing feelings, and it has to do with, again, this notion that I can control anything.
Yeah.
Right? I can make any relationship work. I can make myself feel anything, when it's just not realistic.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a whole other conversation that we can have about how we overanalyze everything that we feel. And sometimes you just have to actually do the feeling. I heard someone talk about it from the lens of calling people self-development junkies, where all they want to do is say the right things and do the right things, but they don't actually ever develop themselves. They're just pretending to do the things. But that's a whole other
I think that takes us back to perfectionism, though.
Yes.
Right? We want to be the best partners, the greatest in business, the best friend. And you asked about social media, and I'm always kind of reticent to vilify social media, because social media isn't its own entity. It's a human creation, and humans use it how we use it. But I do think that when everything is on broadcast, we do feel we need to perform everything.
Yeah.
Right? So everything is filmed and everything is posted, and it's not just consumed by our inner or outer circle. A lot of people are hoping that it's consumed by the general public. And I think that drive can be a lot of pressure. And I'm seeing more Gen Z folks pulling back from social media. I don't have the data on that, but I'm meeting so many people who are saying I'm not on anymore.
It's funny because I was just in Iceland and intentionally didn't turn on my data. And it was so freeing. Just not being able to check, not getting the X number of notifications, not just from social media, but emails and all of those things, just that constant dinging on the phone. And just this morning, I had a conversation with a social creator who talked about taking a step back from social media because it drains him and he just finds himself unhappy doing it.
Yeah,
he's like,
absolutely.
I do this for what exactly? I do it for the small dopamine hits, and then what? He's like, I don't find any passion in this. I do it because it's the thing to do. And yes, I've got contracts and I could do partnerships and all these things. But at the end of the day, it's like, this doesn't give me any fulfillment.
And it really is draining, because that pressure to perform with specific metrics.
Yes.
Right? If you're a performer on stage, you get a rush from it. Of course, it's super exciting.
Yep.
You get energy from the crowd. And yes, okay, you might deal with reviews and stuff like that. But the way you dance on a given night, or, I'm a speaker, the way I speak on a given night, yes, I do get feedback. But it's not like in likes or comments. And I don't have to send it to a client after and say, look at the impressions, look at the conversions, look at your ROI. So it's a different type of performance than, say, a stage performance. And it's overwhelming. And we have the data showing that, right? Depression, anxiety, self-doubt, all of distress. I mean, many people, even people who don't do it for work, experience distress when they don't get the traction that they're looking for.
Absolutely.
So you had your data off, and now you have it back on, obviously, because you're back in Toronto. But I think there's something really important there, because when we think about technology in relationships and we talk about technoference, the role that technology plays in interfering with human connection, I'm often asking people to make small changes to the way technology enhances or detracts from their relationships. And the challenge is that most of us look at tech as an all or nothing approach. So if I ask, for example, would you be willing to not sleep with your phone in the bedroom? That's really scary for people. But I'm like, would you try one night? Everybody is willing to try one night. And then we try and work them up to 2 nights, and then 3 nights. And maybe we don't get to 7 nights. You don't never have your phone in the bedroom. But just to know that sometimes you can go to bed without scrolling on your phone is life-changing. So you went to Iceland. How long were you there?
I was only there about 3.5, 4 days. And
you just got back, right? Like, you just
literally,
flew in right
last
now.
night. Yeah. And I'm still on Icelandic time, which is not that bad. It's only 4 hours ahead, but it was an adventure. I did a lot in a very small window of time, and I'm like, I could use a nap.
I bet. But I mean, now you have it back on. So you did it for a little bit, and then you come back to it. And that's what I'm always trying to get clients to do with technology, when technology is a source of conflict in relationships, which is pretty much every couple I ever work with is arguing about technology, right? And my partner's on their phone too much, or my partner's playing these games too much, or he doesn't pay attention to me because he's always checking his email, or she's using it at the dinner table, whatever the case may be. And so I ask them to set small limits. That's one of the takeaways from almost every workshop I run. What one thing are you willing to do this week to reduce the interference of technology in your relationship? And we can all benefit from that. And I always need the reminder, right? I'm not asking clients to do so many things. I obviously don't do all of them, right? Like I would be exhausted and it would be too much. But sometimes I need the reminder that I don't need to check my phone at this time of night. I don't need to leave my ringer on. There can always be an emergency, and my life is full of emergencies right now with my family situation, but also I need to sleep. And I can't help somebody if I'm completely
empty,
sleep deprived, running on empty. But that's a big thing if folks can think about, is there one thing you can do to change the way you use technology?
I love that. I'm going to implement that actually.
Are you going to not take your phone in the bedroom tonight?
I'm going to try that,
Just tonight.
And I'll text you afterwards and tell you how it goes.
Great.
Yeah. Jess, thank you so much.
That flew by.
Every single time.
Nice
and
to
we could
chat
do a
with
whole
you.
other hour if we wanted to, but this was great. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Enjoy the travels.
Thanh you. Yeah, I'm off to Spain in a few days and then Singapore.
Ooh, very nice. I've never been to Singapore. It's on my list. Spain,
I'm looking forward.
Yeah.
It's work, so but I'm looking forward.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everything. Say hi to Brendan for me.
I will.
And best of luck with the family stuff. I hope it all goes well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Thanks, everyone.